It felt like I had superpowers. That list of projects that are all worth like 10 grand over the next year that you're not going to do. You could do 10 of them in the time you could have done one of them. Claude Code is a new OS for running your business. That went from 60 hours to like 2 or 3 hours, just asking it a bunch of questions. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. I just got off the interview with today's guest, Taylor Pearson. Like many of you, he has jumped enthusiastically into the world of agentic AI and specifically using Claude Code and Claude Cowork. We're going to talk about how these tools differ specifically from LLMs, which many of us use on a day-to-day basis, how we can employ these in our business to supercharge projects, to make AI, to generate new business ideas, and much more. At the top here, I wanted to shout out our sponsor, Bento. So many TMBA listeners are using Bento because it's a solid, no BS email and automation platform built for how founders are actually running businesses in the AI era. If you're already sending real volume of email and want something simpler and more effective, check them out at bentonow.com/TMBA. Now, Taylor, before we get into how this works technically, let's start with something practical. So you've been using Claude Code pretty heavily over the past few months. What actually happened the first time you set it up? It felt like I had superpowers. Something happened with the models, with the Claude Code product, sort of mid-December, kind of right before the Christmas break. They started just like blowing up my Twitter. All these people, everything's Claude Code. And not just technical people anymore. I feel like that was the big switch. Like I knew a lot of developers and stuff that were doing this sort of prior to them. And so it got to something where I was like, okay, I've heard enough different people from enough different sort of pockets of my life or interest sphere or whatever have said something that I have set this up. So it's like, classically, if I'm going to do something in software, I'm like, the easiest thing is like you just take a spreadsheet and turn it into software, right? Because usually a spreadsheet it's a bunch of data in there that has some workflow you've built on top of it. So I had a bunch of old financial data and I was like, that's cool. I'm just going to like drop this into Claude Code and try and clean up the data and like come up with a dashboard to like visualize this data. That would have taken me like dozens of hours to do in Excel. I got in there, I just dumped it into Claude Code. I turned on my voice to text thing and I'm just talking into the microphone like I am to you right now. And I just like tell it this whole history of this is how I started getting this data. It was like old investment data. And I started in this format and then changed to this format. Narrate in there for 5 minutes and it like launches all this stuff. It launches an agent. It like goes into Python. It reads the spreadsheet. Okay, there's 4 different formats for you to come up with all these rules. It comes with all these rules. Comes back, probably takes me an hour. Comes back and it's like got all the data in like a perfectly clean format. So what do you see as the difference when you're using it as a project management tool? Like what's the step forward here? The two like limitations of the traditional like chat-based LLM, like ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, like the web app thing that most people are used to logging into. One is it can write files. Like that's really like the big unlock. You're putting data in and it's just giving you data out and you can tell it to write an email and copy that somewhere. You can tell it to write you a project plan and copy that somewhere. Because it's writing the file on your computer, it's not like, here's a big project plan. I'm going to copy this out and like set it up in my Asana or it's like set it up in a Google Doc. And then like, I've got to go check off the project plan. Like it's checking it off. If it runs into a new thing and like, let's say I have a 5-page project plan, all these detailed things need to get done, dependencies, If something comes up, it can logically go and say, oh, we need to change steps 2, 4, and 7 because this dependency is different. And I'm just going to go do that. You don't have to go copy and paste back and forth from the thing. It just knows all that. I feel like the low-hanging fruit keeps coming up. That list of projects that are all worth like 10 grand over the next year that you're not going to do. It's like you could do 10 of them in the time you could have done one of them. And so maybe we could start with like listing out some specific ways that you think founders could successfully start to use this stuff. And then we can talk about some of the implications, how to set it up, and security concerns. Your business is largely a set of workflows, right? There's a whole set of workflows of things that happen. And these CLI tools, I'm just going to say Claude Code, so CLI, because I think Claude Code is sort of the dominant one right now. Like it is a way for managing all those workflows and doing some parts of those workflows probably much better than any human can do at this stage, or, better, faster, cheaper sort of thing. So if you think about like, if you had amazing SOPs in your business, right, of all the different things, If you just dump that entire SOP library into Claude Code and say, figure out the lowest hanging fruit for how I could like streamline these things in Claude Code, that would be an excellent first project. Claude Code is a new OS for running your business. Like that's what I'm imagining. That the native interface for like how you interact with your business is like you don't log into QuickBooks. You have QuickBooks API access through Claude Code, and you're just talking to you saying, I want to see my P&L for Q4 broken down by month, and I want you to do, whatever, gross margin and contribution margin calculations and tell me if there are any major changes in contribution margin and what you think contributed to those. And it's also hooked up to your whatever, your client data, the other things that like be relevant to pull that in. Like that's how I'm imagining as like an OS for your business.
I guess like I could do the SOP project in a standard LLM in Claude, but now I'm in Claude Code. So I do the same project. I'm having a similar conversation, but I could have it rewrite the SOPs in a way that could go into my project management software.
You can have it do part of the SOPs, right? It writes files and it uses tools. Like that's what's interesting about it.
Mm-hmm.
Uploading posts to your website would be like a good example of a thing. Like right now, I write a blog post. Typically, either I upload it or I send it to someone who then goes to an SOP, and there's like a way that it goes from Google Docs into WordPress, right? So
right.
The heading tag has to be
configured.
Put
tags, you have to add an image.
You got to put images in the right places. The images have to be the right resolution. They got to be stored in the right hosting.
Pull quote, that looks cool.
Right. Exactly. You got to get the right font, all the things. It just does all those things, right? You just have an SOP that is a document, a markdown file. Again, it just says in plain English. If it's a reasonably good SOP, it would be pretty good at figuring out how to just translate that. It might not even do that much translation, but just like adding the details it needs to do that correctly.
So I guess the world that you're making me dream of right now is like, I start to like describe the theoretical workflow of my company vis-a-vis SOPs and conversation, and like this goes to this, and this is why, blog posts are important, and then people opt in, and then once they opt in, they get on the nurture sequence, and then typically we expect about 10% of those people in the nurture sequence to sign up for a sales call with Taylor, and then here's like, the repository of all the recordings of the sales calls, and we convert those sales calls at 50%, and then X percentage sign up for the product, and here's the product delivery, and eventually Claude gets like a bird's eye view of how the whole business works. And what I'm imagining is like, okay, LLM world is like, awesome, this is all organized. But in the Claude world, I could be like, well, I want you to like plug in and update those sales calls repositories. And like when I log in every day, I want you to show me the real-time data and offer a suggestion every morning about how to improve it.
Correct. Or like, yeah, that's a great project. So like, I'm going to record these sales calls. We're going to connect with the API of the note-taking app I'm using. We're going to automatically pull those in. You're going to read all of them. Mm-hmm. You're going to create a client file with all the notes relevant in that client file in a format that we come up with together is most useful for the format of the sales process, and maybe a different file for like when that client's onboarded to automatically pull any information relevant to the onboarding. So you're not sending the client another onboarding file. You're then also going to have a second step, which is you come up with you give me feedback. I've got a whole thing of like how I want to run a sales call, and maybe I did a bad job. I didn't say this, or I did say this, or whatever. You're also going to give me feedback on that, and we're going to use that to create a separate thing that prompts me 5 minutes before a call with a reminder next time to make sure I do XYZ on that sales call. Basically, it's going to send all these things to you.
Can you help us, Taylor, to understand the differences between LLMs and what we're seeing you're calling Claude, basically, which I'm saying agentic? I just want to hear your take on it, because I think we need to hear it a bunch of times to start to understand how this stuff works. For most of us, we know ChatGPT, we know Grok, we know Gemini, we know when we Google, there's an AI thing that we can chat with. How is what you're talking about specifically different?
So LLMs are a type of AI. It's like a next token prediction thing, right? So like you put in some data, it has this big black box of weighting it does, and it gives you something out, and it's using like natural language training data. So like the cat was crossing the blank. It's probably going to say road or sidewalk, or like it's doing a probabilistic thing of like what's likely the next word that's going to come in this sequence. So there's like a whole interesting philosophical question of like, we're used to computers being deterministic, but LLMs aren't. Like you can ask ChatGPT, ask it the same question twice in two different windows, just like it's not the exact same answer. You ask it 2 plus 2, it'll be the exact same answer, right? But if you ask it like a 2-sentence question, you'll get 2 slightly different answers, right? Like the semantic meaning will be more or less the same, but it won't be identical because every time it inserts a new token, and a token's basically a word or close enough, it's like influencing the probability of the subsequent token. You'll just get like a bad chat. It just veers off in a weird way because it's got like a weird set of tokens and you just kind of have to clear it and start again sort of thing. So yes, it's all probabilistic, which is weird, but interesting. And I think that's an important thing. Like I was talking to someone who's like rebuilding some of their accounting stuff, and it's like using Claude Code to build software to do deterministic stuff to your accounting makes a lot of sense, right? But like you don't want your accounting to be probabilistic. It's very rare that they're going to mess up any sort of like basic math things, but yes, it is all probabilistic. So like that's an LLM. Those are the models and those are getting better and better, right? They're putting more and more training in. They have like different techniques for how they're training them and the outputs are getting better and better. There's product category that is not super well named. I'm calling them command line interface tools. I think that's probably the most common name. Claude Code is by far the most popular of them. That is a product which utilizes the model in a particular way.
Okay. It sits on top of it in a way.
Sits on top of the model, correct. So when you are using Claude Code, you're accessing the Claude model through the Claude Code product.
So Claude Code was like the type of product that vibe coders were using.
Yes.
And then recently they come out with Claude Cowork, which is like, hey, everybody should be using this. And working on a command line interface was intimidating to most users of AI products. And so now we're just going to like put that friendly interface stack it right on top of Claude Code again.
A lot of the internal people at Anthropic that were building started like running their life off Claude Code. V1 is they were like doing all the coding and they're like, oh, they had the same realization everyone else is having, which is like, I could like manage my chores. I mean, I could like manage my house projects doing this. I could like manage my to-dos doing this. I could do all sorts of other things with this other than just writing code. I could run email campaigns with this. I could do, all these sort of different types of things. And so that's what Claude Cowork seems to be, which is like a bunch of people started using Claude Code in the way I'm talking about it and the way I'm using it, which is not as like 2% of my Claude Code usage is software development related. 98% of it is like basic business, task management, writing, research, like those sorts of projects, like sort of more generic knowledge work. So it's reading and writing all the files, which I haven't found a way to say that it sounds kind of trivial, but like if you imagine like a really big project document, like going through that, loading up all the mental RAM to think about what are the dependencies on this project, who are the stakeholders, who needs to get what, when, and how. Like that's a ton of work. It is really good at that once you give it appropriate context. And that's sort of like the second level, which is because it can write files, it can basically develop memory over time, right? So like the chat apps have some sort of memory functionality. They added this like a year or two ago, I don't remember, but if you go into your ChatGPT or Claude.
It's a bit stingy, right?
Correct, but it's maybe like 1,500 words or something, right? And it's like some basic, Dan is an entrepreneur that lives in Austin, Texas and has a podcast, What you can do with Claude Code is every time you do a project in there, you can basically have it write a summary of the project, what the key decisions were, why they were decided, who the stakeholders were, like what's relevant to each of them. And then the next time you do a related project, it can go back and read that specific data. And so like the key sort of breakthrough from my perspective as like a non-technical person is all these LLMs have what's called a context window. So you can only hold so much raw data in their like working memory, right? Like the equivalent of like a human working memory or like computer RAM, like things they can hold in memory at the same time. And it's 200,000 tokens is most of them. I think Gemini's is a little longer, but let's call it's like 150,000 words, something in that ballpark. which is like a particular type of task, right? Like any big project you're going to do in your business is there's more than 150,000. You might want to come up with a sales plan, right? You need to read 5 sales books. You need to do 10 customer interviews. It's a lot more than 150,000 words of raw context. And so because Claude Code can read files, it can chunk that down into manageable things, right? So you read 5 sales books and you create 2,000 words of how those sales books are applicable to your sales process. Cool, there's 2,000 words. You go through 100,000 words of customer interviews, pull out 2,000 words that's relevant to your thing. So you're chunking this down into like, what are, for this particular project, what are the specific best, let's say 50,000 words of context it needs to make a good decision or write a good plan. And instead of this just like very basic memory in the web apps, you can sort of customize that. And then what got me excited was like, oh, over time, I can architect this, right? And this compounds, which is to say every time I do a subsequent project, I can then reference all this relevant detail about a previous project I did. So like I do an email campaign and I can then see, it can reference a sales page I wrote 6 weeks ago and all the relevant customer information from that and use that to build, a customer avatar for the email campaign or whatever. So because it can read and write files, you're able to like slowly build up like the equivalent of an SOP for a machine for an
And
AI.
can you break down the idea of writing a file means that whatever apps you're connecting with, it is generating outputs in the native language of that app?
So it's the default version. It does files on your local computer. It does use Markdown is like the most common things. It's written in Markdown, and it also does a lot of stuff in XML and JSON. Honestly, those are like kind of above my pay grade, and I only vaguely understand how they work. But like, if you open TextEdit on your Mac and like type into TextEdit, that's what it looks like. It's just a text file with like brackets for to-dos and that sort of structure. And then it can basically pull data into there and send it out.
And that's the value of it, right? Because like if it were just in plain text, then it can't export and import data to relevant apps.
Correct. So like you think about step one is sort of like, okay, we can have this really relevant context to whatever project we're doing on. And then it has, they call it like tool use is like the technical thing, but like you can just connect it. Like anything with a functional API, it can use the API to use that software, right? So like your CRM, Salesforce, Pipedrive, whatever, right, has an API. It can both read and write through that API.
So in theory, with your spreadsheet project, you could say, it took us X number of hours to create visualizations because the data wasn't structured correctly in the first place. Could you recreate another 60 tab spreadsheet that addresses these core issues so my team can input the data correctly next time? And it would simply be able to do that.
Being a developer probably helps, but like it's pretty amazing what it can do without it. And just like asking it a bunch of questions about like why are you using this database software versus that one, like you can work with it to do stuff. But yeah, like if you have like QuickBooks has a very good API. So like I want to pull this data into QuickBooks and build this custom report. That would be like relatively straightforward. It has access to all that data through the API. You just give it the API token.
We did a episode a few weeks ago where we were just like, move over CTO for a week because, you know what I mean? Like you can kind of do a lot of this strategy work that a lot of us are putting off.
Yeah. And it's like quite like financial analysis stuff. It's like quite good at that. Like anything heavily quantitative, right? There's code related stuff, but yeah, like it's much better than the median financial advisor or like median controller, CFOE person for a lot of this stuff. And I'm hook you up to my QuickBooks and then just like dump a bunch of stuff in here and like I'm really anxious about this, that, and the other. Can you help me come up with a plan to like analyze my profitability per client? If you have time tracking data plus QuickBooks data, it can come, okay, well, we're gonna have to make these assumptions and it's gonna have this margin of error, but like, yeah, we can come up with a thing, like that kind of stuff that would have just been so time intensive, you wouldn't have bothered to undertake it. It's just like that went from 60 hours to like 2 or 3 hours.
Could this like hyper spawn the guy and the gal businesses again. Because you think about like you create this agent that can, for example, the blog cleaner guy, the blog cleaner gal, or the social cleaner. It's like you've built this agent that does this one specific. Now, again, I'm talking about arbitrage. How long is this window going to be open? But it's like now all of a sudden your costs go way down as the guy or the gal, and your sales process gets simpler because it's not high ticket anymore. And so
Yeah.
now we're just like doing a volume thing where my job as the blog cleaner guy or the YouTube title updater guy or whatever is competence about how to interact with the agent, security, plugging into the right data in the right ways so we don't mess anything up. And it's essentially protection of downside, but the upside's obvious to everybody. And like I can go to any company and say, you know, per 100 videos, I'll make your YouTube channel best practice for 2026, you know, $1,000 for 50 videos. And you're just pumping out $5,000 days all day long.
Yeah, there's a window for that for sure. I call him the arbitrage guy, the arbitrage gal, right? It's just like the Teespring. There's just some weird arbitrage that pops up where you can connect these two things, right? So like,
there's all this work that doesn't put in like effective opt-ins and nurtures on like every page on your website. Like those, and that's like the boomer in me saying that, but like there are these like definitely ROI projects, but the cash return cycle was too long and the consulting fee was too high. And like there's this window right now where it feels like, well, wow, people can get their ROI within a few months and the costs to do so are much lower.
If you have a huge content library, like I'm going to turn your content library into 500 tweets or Instagram post, whatever. That's like probably right. You just fire up Claude Code. You can build a scraper, not a big deal. You pay $10 an API cost or something to scrape a 500-page website, probably less than that. And then you create a skill in Claude Code that looks for particular types of content that's good for Twitter, create a Twitter library, hook that up to the Typefully API where it's published. And like, that's like a week-long project. And like, how many people would be happy to pay you $5,000 for a year's worth of Twitter content or something like that? Yeah, I think there's going to be a bunch of that kind of stuff. Or there's an opportunity for it for sure. And eventually it goes away, but you know, the arbitrage person moves on to whatever the next thing is.
Let's talk a little top level stuff. So we talked to the specifics. What is the famous final four words in investing? It's like, this time it's going to be different or whatever.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people saying that with this wave of technology, that indeed it will be different, that white collar work will be forever disrupted, and that there's no immediately obvious place for everybody to go, that companies will be disrupted, the way we think about business will be disrupted, that in fact, this stuff could ultimately be enormously dangerous to humanity in the very short run. There's like the most prosaic examples of the danger that these things pose are, you know, like chaos agent swarms and security concerns. Already you're seeing the effect on the markets for that. National security stuff. Our entire infrastructures, both business and national, are built on code. And now you've got a gazillion Einsteins trying to find exploits and everything. I'm curious about what you think like the sort of medium term implications are for founders specifically, and maybe you could make a prediction about white collar work as well.
The Anthropic CEO, Dario, something like 10 to 50% of white collar work is automated in 3 to 5 years. So it's like something in that range of prediction, which is like a crazy, right? Like that's an insane level of automation. On the white collar sort of knowledge work thing, my impression is a lot of the like tech people probably haven't worked in a lot of regulated industries and stuff like this isn't going to be in your hospital in 3 years. It doesn't matter how good the technology is. There's just zero chance, right? Like that's a 15-year sort of thing. So this time it is always different, but it's always different along a particular dimension that's like not well understood and kind of confusing, right? Like the internet doesn't like make information wasn't free and commerce didn't disappear and whatever. We ended up with like, oh, it turned out that when you're not constrained by like having a newspaper, you can have this thing called a feed, which you can scroll endlessly, which you can insert ads into. And so you have tons of small businesses that can buy these ads and use them as direct marketing to sell these niche products, because you can create psychographic profiles of people based on their browser history. And so you got this ecosystem of these big platform businesses selling ads to these niche small businesses doing these like more custom bespoke products that were never going to be worth shelf space in Target or Walmart, but for which they, right, like, so it was different along a particular dimension. And so I think that's like the interesting question from a founder perspective, is like, it is different and things are going to change along some dimension that aligns with this technology. And it's not super clear to me what that is. The term I keep coming back to is from it's an AI guy, professor at Wharton, Ethan Malik. He called it the jagged frontier. That they're just incredibly good at certain things and incredibly bad at other things. That like the tendency when you talk to these models is, because it feels so human, you start to treat it as if it's a person with person-like capabilities, but it really doesn't have person-like capabilities, right? It is so much better at math than everyone listening to this podcast,
Yep.
and so much worse at reading the tone or voice of conversation than a 6-year-old. Think about all the workflows in your business, and like, it's going to be really good at some of those and really bad at some of those. And it's going to unlock new things that just previously didn't make sense to do because they were too expensive or time consuming, but it happens to be really good along those dimensions. So I think that's like kind of how I'm thinking about it in like knowledge work specifically, is that like legal contracts, it's great at, right? Because like a legal
Yeah.
contract is like very close to code or math, right? It's like a set of propositional statements that all like logically cohere in a particular way. And it seems to be like, as a first draft of a legal contract, like quite good. But like, even I've used it like a bunch for writing, and like it's better than the average person that never writes, but it sounds stilted, and you can't, no matter how much you prompt it, it always ends, it's not this, it's this, right? Like there's like all these like little quirks it does that you like can't prompt it out of doing weird sort of like over exaggerated statements. That's a big ramble of different stuff. I guess that's kind of my impression.
There's
Right?
part of me that's like trying to read the tea leaves for bootstrappers. What does this mean for us in the next 12 months? And like my instinct says a lot of work. That's the irony. I think a lot of our teams aren't as incentivized to do this, like not necessarily where they sit in the organization. Like a lot of this stuff, you're trying to connect dots across a broad range and maybe targets that aren't specific on their desk. And so it wouldn't make sense for them to build a system that optimizes. I'm sure, our team's using it every day and stuff, not Claude Code, but certainly LLMs. And it sort of feels like a lot of founders are going to just dunk right back in and start to get their hands dirty and sit in front of a bunch of screens this year.
It's just like an exciting time to be entrepreneurial again. I started for like 2010, early 2010s or whatever. And like, the internet was just really unformed at that. Remember all these waves, like Google AdWords came out, and it was like no one knew how Google AdWords worked. It was like the first time we'd had like search ads, and SEO came out, and Twitter launched, and Facebook launched, and
Yeah,
right, there was like the Facebook games. Like, it was just like really dynamic, right? It was all changing. And we felt like with the sort of traditional era, we got into this phase of like these like ossified walled gardens where like sort of the rules are set, and you're playing with this in very constrained sort of like set of the regulatory stuff. And then you have the regulatory stuff of the platforms like Amazon and Facebook and all this. And like, it feels like this is like kind of redrawing, like it's all up in the air a bit more again. We're kind of like redrawing a bunch of the lines in the same way, like sort of early internet stuff rolled up and just like redrew, new technology. We're redrawing a bunch of the lines. I was just felt a little bit bored of like, you publish a thing and you gotta grow it to the social channels and you get your lead magnet conversion, right? Like there's a
totally.
whole way this thing's done. And like, that's how it works now. And everyone's sort of figured out, and everyone's looking for like relatively micro optimizations on that thing. And now it feels like we just get to throw. I had a call with something a couple weeks ago, like everything I told you about, like how you had to like do your personal productivity, so you had to write it down and put it in tasks. I'll throw that in the garbage. Everything I told you about that for the last decade, that is garbage because you just talk to this machine and it organizes it all for you. So all those things that you got to do nested bullet points. So you have the subtask. That's trash. That existed in a world that is gone. That existed in the world before Claude Code you could just talk to it and it would just write and update the plan for you based on your natural language, right? It's like, that's great. That's just 50 blog posts I wrote. Those are just in the garbage. Those are no longer relevant. There's 50 more blog posts to be written about, what this is now.
That's awesome. Well, I feel the excitement too. And I'm feeling inspired by this conversation to get started next week. We started before the call. I was like, yeah, I'm in a couple of weeks. So you're like, dude, a week. We got to do it. Okay. So that's the end of the episode. If anybody loves hearing from Taylor as much as I do, taylorpearson.me. Sign up for that newsletter. It's one of the best in the business. Any other places they can check you out on the web?
That's probably best. Twitter or X, the platform
X.
formerly known as Twitter. Yeah.
Amazing. Could we do at the end here a little coda where we help listeners who are going to come along this journey set this up? Are there some things that they need to do in order to get started with? I'm assuming most of us are going to select Claude Cowork. Should we just ask Claude the whole time what to do? Do we need to even do this coda?
Claude Cowork is you search Claude Cowork, you download the app, you have your subscription, you got to pay $20 a month, and you just start talking to it. Claude Code requires like 3 additional steps, which is you have to like install it on your computer. But like the basic steps, the easiest way to do it is you use it inside an app called VS Code. So you download VS Code, download that. If you go to YouTube and then search how to install Claude on VS Code, there's a gajillion 3-minute videos.
Now, why would you, as a non-technical person, I would say like 90% of us are non-technical, why would you want to use Claude Code over Claude Cowork?
As a first project, I think it's like kind of a toss-up. It actually doesn't matter. The thing that Claude Code can do, that my understanding of Claude Code and what I've seen is what it can't do, is like the way I was talking about, you can get really specific about, I want to, context engineering is the phrase they use, but like you're trying to get the best output from this model, which is doing probabilistic calculations based on all the data currently in its context window. So like you want to insert all the right information in just the right way. Claude Code has a lot more tools to allow you to do that in a much more sophisticated and detailed manner. When you're just like working with a blank slate and there's like no context in there for it to organize except like what you're dumping in for the first version, I think Claude Cowork is totally fine. But you get over time, it's like starting to build up SOPs in your business and trained employees, right? Everything else gets easier after that. So like Claude Cowork, you're a little bit more starting from a blank slate or a blanker slate each time. I don't know, the Claude Code thing is more intimidating, but like the learning curve is like 2 to 4 hours. So I think there's nothing wrong with doing Claude Cowork for the first version, but like I think you do, as like a business owner, you want to graduate to Claude Code relatively quickly because I think you're leaving like a lot on the table by now.
Cool. Makes sense. Taylor Pearson, we appreciate your time. We appreciate you coming by the Tropical MBA podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
I'm on our sponsor's website right now. You got to check it out. It's absolutely beautiful. bentonow.com/TMBA. It's email marketing built for and by bootstrap founders. Bento is a powerful email marketing and automation platform built for fast-growing, location-independent entrepreneurs. Whether you're emailing a few thousand people a week or 1 million, Bento's got you covered. Their AI features are insane. You can just describe the workflow you want, and Bento will build it for you. What's better is they have an offer just for TMBA listeners. You can choose to either get $300 in credits immediately after your free trial to check out all the features, or they will price match your current email marketing provider aggressively. You choose. So thank you to Bento for sponsoring the podcast, and go check out how Bento can not only save you money, but improve your email marketing starting today. You can find out more at bentonow.com/TMBA.